This is the stuff of legend, man. I picked up that stack of Mad magazines from a yard sale recently for like a couple of bucks. This one was in there too. And it's awesome, and I felt like a criminal when I left, because I'm like, you guys have no idea what you just sold me for $2 and what it's worth to me, to an extent, and to dudes and ladies of my generation who grew up with Mad magazine. And to those people, you've got the Mad Files. This is a new book of essays that talks about Mad magazine and how geniusly irreverent and how utterly groundbreaking the magazine was back in the day, back in the late 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the heyday of the 80s and the 90s. That's when those magazines were from, and that's what kind of shaped my sense of humor, and that's what the Mad Files are all about, because it talks about some humorists, some satirists, and some comedians who grew up, and they're currently writers, or they're all sorts of things, but they're essays about Mad magazine. And what they do is they remind you of how great Mad magazine was. The essays themselves, they're not particularly meant to be humorous per se, but they are entertaining. Some of the essays, it's about 25 to 27 essays in total, and the essays range from just waxing poetic to what they meant, to what Mad magazine meant to that particular creator, to how Mad magazine was created, to the Jewishness of Mad magazine and its creators. And then when certain things are mentioned in the essays, you, as a reader, an old school fan of Mad magazine, will kick back and say, I remember when they used that term. I remember when Berg used that term so many times, and I didn't know what it meant. And now, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was a Jewish term. Get out of town. And it makes it even funnier because it shaped your sense of humor. If you're a dude or a gal of a certain age, or even a latecomer who read Mad magazine, and you're like, wow, you know what? This is funny stuff. It's so subversive and irreverent and weird and funny and creative and just artistically. If you look at an old issue of Mad magazine, it ranged the gamut from styles of art to the utterly simple Sergio Aragon art, the spy versus spy stuff that was really simple, to the Dave Berg stuff that was much more artistic and realistic, but still absurdly non-human. And it's funny stuff. The Mad Files is not going to be for everybody. If you didn't like Mad magazine growing up and you didn't know why people enjoyed it, it's not going to be for you. But if you grew up reading Mad magazine and you're like, I kind of remember it and I'd like to recall more of it, then these essays are for you. It's important to note that the Mad Files doesn't have reprints of Mad magazine in it. It just has essays about the magazine. Having said that, I had more fun reading the Mad Files than I thought I would, because I'm a Mad magazine fan, and I get it. I get the classicness of it all. But even just reading about the fun times that they had creating it, and the history, and how Mad magazine came from a Mad magazine comic book, which came from EC Comics. And EC Comics I knew from the horror comics, even though I unfortunately don't have any EC Comics from the day. Those are those horror comics, the old creep shows and stuff, like from the late 50s before the comics registry supposedly was a thing. That was never a thing. But that's talked about in the book too. The Mad Files is good fun for anyone who's a Mad magazine fan or who likes classic comedy and they want to dig into how that classic comedy was created. It is the Mad Files. It is a Library of America compilation, and it's a hoot if you're a fan of Mad magazine.